I stood in the doorway of Hawthorne Gallery, watching the autumn light filter through the tall windows onto the polished concrete floors. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility. After 3 years of working under demanding gallery owners in Seattle, I had finally opened my own contemporary art gallery in Portland. My savings account was nearly empty, but my dreams had never felt more tangible. The gallery specialized in emerging artists, the kind whose work made your chest tighten and your perspective shift. I had spent months cultivating relationships with painters, sculptors, and mixed media artists who deserved recognition. Every piece in my inaugural exhibition had been chosen with meticulous care. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Olivia. "How's opening week going?" "Slow but steady," I typed back, not wanting to admit that I had sold only 2 pieces in 5 days. The truth was more complicated than slow. The Portland art scene was saturated with galleries, and breaking through required not just talent and taste, but connections and capital. I had the first 2, but the third remained frustratingly elusive. That afternoon, a woman in her early 50s walked in. She wore an elegant navy dress and moved through the space with the confidence of someone who knew art intimately. Her eyes lingered on a large abstract piece by a local painter named Jordan, all swirling blues and fractured light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I approached her with a smile. "Remarkable," she said. "You have an excellent eye." "Thank you. I'm Natalie, the owner." "Veronica," she replied, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "I run Castellane Consulting. We advise collectors and institutions on acquisitions." My heart jumped. Consulting firms like hers could make or break emerging galleries. A single recommendation from Veronica could mean the difference between survival and closure. "I'd love to hear more about your work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We talked for nearly an hour. Veronica asked insightful questions about my artists, my vision, and my background. She seemed genuinely impressed by my knowledge and passion. Before leaving, she handed me her card. "I'm hosting a private viewing event next month," she said. "For serious collectors. I'd like to feature some of your artists. Are you interested?" "Absolutely," I said, perhaps too eagerly. "Wonderful. I'll be in touch with details." After she left, I allowed myself a moment of celebration. This was the break I had been hoping for. Veronica's event could connect my artist with buyers who had the means and desire to invest in contemporary work. The following week, Veronica returned with a young man she introduced as her associate, Trevor. He was probably in his late 20s, with carefully styled hair and an expensive watch. Where Veronica radiated professional warmth, Trevor seemed perpetually bored, scrolling through his phone while she examined the artwork. "Trevor handles our digital presence and client communications," Veronica explained. "Nice space," Trevor said without looking up. Over the next 2 weeks, Veronica became a regular visitor. She asked to borrow several pieces for what she called preview purposes, assuring me they would be featured prominently at her event. I carefully packaged 3 of my best works, including Jordan's abstract piece and 2 sculptures by an artist named Felix. "These will generate significant interest," Veronica promised. "I have several collectors already asking about emerging artists from the Pacific Northwest." I felt like I was finally being seen, finally being taken seriously. Veronica treated me like a colleague rather than a desperate newcomer. She invited me to coffee, asked about my previous experience in Seattle, and shared stories about the art world that made me feel like an insider. "The key to success in this business," she told me over lattes one morning, "is understanding that art is only half the equation. The other half is relationships." "I'm learning that," I said. "You're a natural," she replied. "You have something rare, an authentic passion that collectors respond to. Too many gallery owners are just in it for the money." Her words felt like validation. I had worried that my idealism would be a liability, but Veronica made it sound like an asset. Trevor remained largely indifferent during these conversations, occasionally interjecting with comments about market trends and demographic targeting. I found him off-putting, but I told myself that his rudeness was just a different professional style. The day before Veronica's event, she called with unexpected news. "Natalie, I have a wonderful opportunity. One of my top collectors, a tech investor named Patrick, saw photos of Jordan's piece. He's very interested, but he's flying to Tokyo tomorrow and won't be at the event. Would you be willing to arrange a private viewing this evening?" "Of course," I said immediately. "Perfect. Come to my office at 7. Patrick will meet us there." I arrived at Castellane Consulting's sleek downtown office building 15 minutes early, carrying a portfolio of Jordan's other work. The reception area was empty, but the door to Veronica's office was ajar. "Hello?" I called, stepping inside. The office was dimly lit. I heard voices from an interior conference room and walked toward them. Through the half-open door, I saw Veronica and Trevor standing in front of a laptop, their backs to me. "The prices are already up," Trevor was saying. "Nobody's going to trace it back to us." "Just keep the listings vague," Veronica replied. "Once they sell, we'll tell her they didn't generate interest at the event." I froze, my hand on the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat as I processed what I had just heard. I stepped back silently, my mind racing. They were selling my artist's work, the pieces I had entrusted to them, and they had no intention of telling me. I retreated to the elevator as quietly as I had come, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and tried to think clearly. Part of me wanted to storm back upstairs and confront them. But another part, the part that had learned to be strategic during my years in Seattle's competitive gallery scene, told me to be smart. I drove home and immediately opened my laptop. It took less than 10 minutes to find the listings. There, on an exclusive art sales platform, were all 3 pieces I had loaned to Veronica. Jordan's abstract painting was listed for $12,000, triple what I would have charged. The sculptures by Felix were similarly overpriced. The seller's account was registered under a generic business name, but the photos were unmistakably the ones I had provided. I felt sick. I had been so desperate for validation, so eager to believe that someone with Veronica's reputation saw value in my work, that I had walked straight into a trap. She had never intended to feature my artists at any event. She had simply wanted free inventory to flip for profit. My phone rang. "Veronica. Natalie, where are you? Patrick is here." I wanted to scream at her. Instead, I forced my voice to remain calm. "I'm so sorry. I had a family emergency. I had to leave town suddenly." "Oh no. Is everything all right?" The concern in her voice was so convincing, so perfectly performed, that I almost doubted what I had heard in her office. "It will be," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up before she could respond, and spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment. I had no idea what to do. Confronting Veronica directly would likely accomplish nothing. She and Trevor could simply deny everything, claim the listings were a misunderstanding, and I would be left looking paranoid and unprofessional. Going to the police seemed pointless without clear evidence that would hold up legally. The pieces were in her possession with my permission, after all. By morning, I had decided on a different approach. I would play along, pretend I suspected nothing, and gather information. If Veronica thought she had gotten away with her scheme, she might reveal more about how her operation worked. And if I could understand the full scope of her fraud, I could find a way to expose it. I called her around 10 in the morning. "Veronica, I'm so sorry about last night." "Don't worry at all. Is your family all right?" "Yes, thank you. False alarm mostly. I feel terrible about missing Patrick. These things happen. Actually, he's still in town for another day. Would tonight work instead?" "Absolutely," I lied. "Wonderful. Same time, same place." That evening, I showed up at her office with the portfolio. Patrick turned out to be a real person, a pleasant man in his 40s, who asked intelligent questions about Jordan's technique and inspiration. Veronica played the role of gracious consultant perfectly, facilitating the conversation without dominating it. After 30 minutes, Patrick said he needed to think about it. He thanked us both and left. I waited until I heard the elevator doors close. "Veronica, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you typically handle commissions on pieces you help sell?" She smiled warmly. "Standard industry rate is 20%, but for emerging galleries like yours, I only take 15. I believe in supporting new voices in the art world." The lie was so smooth, so rehearsed, that I almost admired her skill. "That's very generous," I said. Over the next 3 weeks, I became Veronica's ideal client. I accepted her advice without question, loaned her additional pieces when she requested them, and treated her like a mentor. She seemed pleased by my deference, and Trevor became slightly less dismissive in my presence. During this time, I did my own research. I created fake buyer accounts on various platforms and tracked the pieces Veronica had taken from me. All 3 sold within 10 days, and none of the money came to me. When I asked about the private viewing event, Veronica said it had been postponed due to scheduling conflicts. "But don't worry," she assured me. "I'm setting up something even better for January, a collector's brunch with some very influential people." I also started asking careful questions around Portland's art community. At a gallery opening one evening, I struck up a conversation with another gallery owner, a woman in her 60s named Diane. "Do you know Veronica from Castellane Consulting?" I asked casually. Diane's expression shifted, something dark passing across her face. "I know of her. She's been helping me connect with collectors." "Be careful," Diane said quietly. "I had a friend who worked with her 2 years ago. It didn't end well." "What happened?" Diane glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Veronica borrowed several valuable pieces for what she called a preview event. My friend never saw them again. When she confronted Veronica, she threatened to ruin her reputation in the industry. Said she'd spread word that the pieces were fakes, that my friend was a fraud. My friend didn't have the resources to fight her legally, so she let it go. Last I heard, she had closed her gallery and moved to San Francisco." My blood ran cold. "Did she ever report it to the police?" "She tried, but Veronica had paperwork showing the pieces were loaned voluntarily, and without proof of sale, there wasn't much the police could do. Veronica's smart. She always stays just on the right side of legal." I thanked Diane and left the opening early. In my car, I sat in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Veronica was not just an opportunist. She was a predator with a system, someone who had refined her methods over years of targeting vulnerable gallery owners like me. The realization that I was not Veronica's first victim changed everything. This was not just about recovering my artist's work or getting the money she owed me. This was about stopping someone who had built a career on exploitation. I spent the next several days thinking through every possible approach. Confrontation was out. Legal action seemed unlikely to succeed, given what Diane had told me. But if I could not beat Veronica through conventional means, I would have to outmaneuver her, using her own tactics. The idea came to me late one night, while I was reviewing my gallery's finances. Veronica's entire operation depended on trust and access. Gallery owners gave her their best pieces because they believed she had the connections and expertise to sell them. But what if I could create a situation where her reputation was damaged beyond repair? What if I could expose her not just to her victims, but to the collectors and institutions she relied on for legitimacy? I started by documenting everything. I took screenshots of the online listings, recorded the dates when I had loaned her specific pieces, and saved every text and email exchange we had. I also reached out to Diane's friend in San Francisco, a woman named Beth, who was initially reluctant to talk, but eventually shared her own story of being defrauded by Veronica. "She's still doing it?" Beth asked, her voice tight with anger. "She is, and I want to stop her." "How?" I'm not sure yet, but I need to know everything about how she operates. What did she say to you? How did she explain the missing pieces? Beth told me about the preview event that never happened, the excuses that piled up over months, and finally the threats when she tried to hold Veronica accountable. The pattern was identical to my experience. There have to be others, I said. There are. I know at least 3 other gallery owners in Oregon and Washington who've had similar experiences. Most of them are too scared or embarrassed to talk about it. Would they talk to me? There was a long pause. Maybe, if they thought it could actually lead somewhere. I spent the following week tracking down these other gallery owners. 2 of them refused to speak with me, but one, a man named Gregory who ran a small gallery in Seattle, agreed to meet for coffee. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with a weariness that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. She took 4 pieces from me, Gregory said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. Told me she had a private collector interested in Pacific Northwest landscapes. I gave her my best work, pieces I had spent months trying to sell through normal channels. When I asked for updates, she always had an excuse. The collector was traveling, the collector was reconsidering, the collector wanted to see more options first. After 3 months, I demanded the pieces back. She told me they had been damaged in transit, and that her insurance would cover it. I never saw a penny. Did you have any documentation? A loan agreement, but it was deliberately vague. She's careful about that. Everything is verbal promises and implications. Nothing she says can be used against her in court. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. So she just gets away with it? She has so far. Gregory finally took a sip of his coffee. What are you planning to do? I'm going to expose her, I said. But I need to do it in a way that can't be dismissed or threatened away. I need proof that's so clear, so public, that she can't spin her way out of it. How? That was the question I had been turning over in my mind for days. Veronica's power came from her reputation among collectors and institutions. If I could damage that reputation in front of the people who mattered most to her business, I could neutralize her ability to hurt anyone else. An idea began to form, risky and elaborate, but possible. Does Veronica still host events? I asked Gregory. She does, usually small, private affairs for collectors. Why? Because I think it's time she hosted one more. Over the next 2 weeks, I put my plan into motion. First, I reached out to Veronica and expressed interest in hosting a collaborative event at my gallery. I framed it as an opportunity to showcase both established collectors and emerging artists in an intimate setting. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her over the phone. About relationships being half the equation. I'd love to learn from you by co-hosting something together. Veronica was intrigued. What did you have in mind? An evening event at Hawthorne Gallery. You invite your collector clients, and I'll provide the artwork and the space. We can split any sales that result. That could work, she said slowly. When were you thinking? Mid-December, before everyone leaves town for the holidays. We agreed on a date, and I began the careful work of setting up what I knew would be Veronica's downfall. I contacted every gallery owner I could find who had been victimized by her, including Beth and Gregory. I asked them to document their experiences in writing and to provide any evidence they had, no matter how small. I also did something else, something I hoped would give me leverage. I created a fake collector persona, a wealthy buyer from Vancouver with an interest in contemporary sculpture. Using a burner email and phone number, I contacted Veronica's business and expressed interest in acquiring pieces for a new corporate collection. Trevor responded within hours, eager and professional in a way he had never been with me in person. Over several exchanges, I got him to describe Castellane Consulting's process in detail, including how they sourced pieces and priced them for clients. Every email was another piece of evidence. As December approached, I felt the weight of what I was planning. This was not just about revenge. It was about justice for everyone Veronica had exploited. But I also knew that if my plan failed, I would likely lose everything I had built. Veronica would ensure I never worked in the art world again. The night before the event, I barely slept. I reviewed my preparations obsessively, checking and rechecking every detail. The morning of the event, I arrived at Hawthorne Gallery at dawn. The space needed to be perfect, not just aesthetically but strategically. Every piece of artwork, every sightline, every positioning of furniture had to serve my larger purpose. I had arranged for catering from a local restaurant, simple but elegant appetizers and wine. Veronica had sent over a guest list of 32 people, all collectors or art advisors from her network. I had added 10 of my own guests, though I had not told Veronica who they were. By 6 in the evening, everything was ready. The gallery glowed with carefully positioned lighting, and the artwork looked spectacular. I had chosen pieces from artists Veronica had never met, ensuring she could not interfere with them the way she had with Jordan and Felix. Veronica arrived at 6:30, impeccably dressed in a black silk blouse and tailored pants. Trevor followed behind her, carrying a leather portfolio. "Natalie, this looks wonderful," Veronica said, surveying the space with approval. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thank you. I learned from the best," I replied, my smile perfectly calibrated. The guests began arriving shortly after 7. They were an impressive group, well-dressed and clearly knowledgeable about art. Veronica moved through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing collectors to one another and pointing out specific pieces with authoritative commentary. I played the role of grateful protégé, deferring to Veronica's expertise and making sure her wine glass stayed full. Trevor stationed himself near the entrance, checking people in against the guest list on his tablet. At 7:45, my own guests began to arrive. First came Beth from San Francisco, whom I introduced to Veronica as a collector interested in emerging artists. Veronica showed no sign of recognition. Either she had defrauded so many people that individual faces blurred together, or she was an even better actress than I had realized. Gregory arrived next, and I saw a flicker of something cross Veronica's face. But she recovered quickly, greeting him with professional warmth. "Gregory, what a surprise. Are you still in Seattle?" "I am," he said evenly. "I heard about this event and wanted to see what Natalie has been working on." The other gallery owners I had contacted trickled in over the next 15 minutes. Most of them Veronica did not seem to recognize, but I noticed Trevor watching them with increasing suspicion. At 8:15, I asked for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward where I stood near the center of the gallery. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," I began. When I opened Hawthorne Gallery 6 months ago, I had a vision of creating a space that honored both artistic integrity and the business realities of the art world. I've learned so much during this time, particularly from my mentor, Veronica. Veronica smiled graciously, clearly expecting a tribute. "Veronica taught me that success in this industry requires understanding relationships and trust," I continued. "She taught me how collectors think, how to present work in ways that resonate with buyers, and how to navigate the complex dynamics of the contemporary art market." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "She also taught me something else, though I don't think she intended to. She taught me how predators operate in spaces built on trust." The room went completely silent. Veronica's smile froze. 6 months ago, I loaned Veronica 3 pieces of artwork for what she described as a private viewing event. Those pieces never appeared at any event. Instead, they were listed for sale on online platforms under a shell business name. The money from those sales, over $30,000, never reached me or my artists. Veronica's face had gone pale. "Natalie, what are you talking about? This is completely inappropriate." "Is it?" I pulled out my phone and projected images onto the gallery's white wall using a small portable projector I had set up earlier. The first image showed Jordan's abstract painting on the art sales platform. The second showed the listing details, including the seller's account information. The third showed the date of sale. "These are serious accusations," Trevor said, stepping forward. "You can't just—" "I have documentation for everything," I said calmly. "Emails, loan agreements, sales records, and screenshots of listings. But I'm not the only one Veronica has targeted." I gestured to Beth. "This is Beth. 2 years ago, Veronica borrowed 4 pieces from her Seattle gallery under similar pretenses. Beth never saw those pieces or any compensation." Beth stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly, but determined. "Veronica threatened to destroy my reputation in the industry if I pursued legal action. She said she would tell everyone my work was fake, that I was unreliable. I closed my gallery because of her." Gregory spoke next, describing his own experience. Then 2 other gallery owners shared their stories. With each testimony, the crowd's attention shifted more firmly toward Veronica, who stood frozen near the entrance. "This is absurd," Veronica finally said, her voice sharp. "These are clearly disgruntled business associates who didn't understand the terms of our agreements. I run a legitimate consulting business. Do you?" I projected another series of images, these from my correspondence with Veronica's business, using my fake collector persona. The emails showed Trevor describing how they sourced pieces from partner galleries and resold them at significant markups without the gallery's knowledge. "That was taken out of context," Trevor said quickly. "Those emails were about a completely different—" "Stop." Veronica's voice was cold. She turned to me, and I saw genuine fury in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've just done. I have connections throughout this industry. I can make sure you never sell another piece of art in this city." "I don't think you can," I said quietly. "Because everyone in this room now knows what you are. And more importantly, everyone in this room has the documentation to prove it." I had given copies of all my evidence to every guest before the event started, slipping folders into their hands as they arrived. The collectors, the legitimate ones who had trusted Veronica, were now looking at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. One of them, an older man in an expensive suit, spoke up. "Veronica, is this true? Have you been selling misrepresented inventory? I can explain, because if it is, I need to review every acquisition you've advised me on for the past 3 years." Other voices joined in, collectors demanding answers, asking questions, expressing betrayal. The carefully constructed reputation Veronica had built was crumbling in real time. Trevor tried to salvage the situation, his voice rising as he addressed the crowd. "Everyone, please. This is clearly a coordinated attack by people with vendettas. If you'll just let Veronica explain the business model—" "The business model is fraud," Gregory interrupted. "Call it consulting, call it curation, call it whatever you want. She steals from small gallery owners and resells their work at inflated prices. That's the model." Veronica's composure was fracturing. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her wineglass. "This is defamation. I will sue every single one of you." "With what money?" Beth asked. "The money you stole from us? Good luck explaining that in court." I watched as Veronica scanned the room, looking for allies or escape routes. The collectors who had trusted her were backing away, both literally and figuratively. Several were already on their phones, likely contacting lawyers or other colleagues in the industry. One woman, a gallery owner I recognized from Vancouver, approached me. "Do you have copies of all this documentation?" "I do. I can send it to you tonight." "Please do. I worked with Veronica last year on what she called a collaborative acquisition. Now I'm wondering what actually happened to those pieces." As more people came forward with questions or their own suspicions, Veronica made her move toward the exit. I stepped into her path. "You're not leaving yet," I said. "We're not finished. Get out of my way, Natalie. Not until you return what you stole, from me and from everyone else here." Veronica laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think this little performance means anything? You think you've won? I have lawyers who will bury you in paperwork. I have contacts who will make sure your name is poison in every gallery from here to New York. You'll never recover from this." "Maybe," I said, "but neither will you." I could see the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of options. She was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage, how to spin this situation into something survivable. But the evidence was too clear, too documented, and too public. "Trevor," she snapped, "we're leaving." Trevor moved toward the door, but I had anticipated this. Two people stepped into the entrance, blocking the exit. They were not part of the art world. They were private investigators I had hired to document Veronica's activities over the past month. I had not been certain I would need them tonight, but their presence made Veronica stop in her tracks. "These are private investigators," I explained to the room. "For the past 4 weeks, they've been tracking the movement and sale of artwork through Veronica's business. They've documented transactions, verified buyer identities, and traced money flows. Everything they found corroborates what we've presented tonight." One of the investigators, a woman in her 40s, stepped forward. "We've also filed reports with the Oregon Attorney General's office regarding possible wire fraud and interstate commerce violations. Given the dollar amounts involved and the number of victims across state lines, this falls under federal jurisdiction." The color drained from Veronica's face again. Federal charges meant this was no longer just about civil lawsuits or reputation. This was criminal. "You're bluffing," Trevor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The reports were filed this morning," the investigator continued. "We have evidence of at least 18 separate incidents of fraud spanning 3 years and 4 states. The cumulative value of misappropriated artwork exceeds $400,000. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The scope of Veronica's operation was larger than even I had realized. Some of the collectors began demanding to see the investigative reports immediately. Veronica turned to me, her expression hardening into something cold and calculated. "You've made a mistake, Natalie. You think you're protecting people, but you've just painted a target on your back. There are others in this industry who operate the way I do, and they won't appreciate you setting this precedent." "Let them come," I said, "because now there's a blueprint for how to stop them." I gestured to the folders I had distributed earlier. "Everyone here has documentation not just about Veronica's specific actions, but about the patterns and tactics used in these schemes. The shell companies, the vague contracts, the verbal promises that create deniability. It's all outlined. And I've sent copies to the major art industry publications, along with a detailed account of tonight's event." That was the final blow. Veronica's face twisted with rage, and something else. Fear. Public exposure in the industry meant her business model was finished. No gallery owner would trust her, no collector would work with her, and no institution would take her calls. "You self-righteous fool," Veronica hissed. "You have no idea how this world actually works. The big galleries, the auction houses, the top-tier consultants, they all operate in gray areas. You think your precious integrity will protect you? It won't. You'll be crushed by people with more money and fewer scruples than I ever had." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll be able to sleep at night." The investigators moved to flank Veronica and Trevor, making it clear they were not leaving without having some difficult conversations first. Several of the collectors had formed a group near the back of the gallery, comparing notes and discussing potential legal action. Beth approached me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you. I never thought I'd see any kind of justice for what she did to me. This is just the beginning," I said. "We need to make sure she can't do this to anyone else." Gregory joined us, along with the other gallery owners who had been victimized. We formed a circle, an impromptu support group bound by shared experience and the satisfaction of watching our abuser face consequences. "What happens now?" one of them asked. "Now we rebuild," I said. "We share information, we support each other, and we create a network that makes it harder for people like Veronica to operate." As the evening wore on, the dynamic in the gallery shifted. What had started as a confrontation became something else, a community forming in real time. The collectors who had been deceived by Veronica began talking with the gallery owners she had defrauded. Connections were made, business cards exchanged, and a genuine spirit of collaboration emerged from the wreckage of her reputation. Veronica and Trevor were eventually escorted out by the investigators, who informed them that formal interviews would be scheduled within the week. As they left, Veronica turned back one last time, her gaze locking with mine. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." After Veronica and Trevor left, the energy in the gallery transformed. What remained was not anger or vindication, but a strange sense of relief, mixed with possibility. The collectors who stayed were genuinely interested in the artwork now, engaging with it on its own merits rather than through the filter of Veronica's manipulative curation. I sold 3 pieces that night, all at fair prices that appropriately compensated the artists. It felt like a small miracle after months of struggling to break through, but more valuable than the sales were the conversations that emerged. Gallery owners from different cities exchanged contact information and talked about creating a warning system, a way to flag suspicious consultants or buyers before they could do damage. "We should have done this years ago," Gregory said. "If we had been talking to each other instead of staying isolated, Veronica would have been exposed much sooner." "It's not too late to start," Beth said. "We can build something better now." As midnight approached and the last guests filtered out, I stood alone in the gallery, looking at the empty wine glasses and the scattered folders of evidence. Olivia arrived, having waited outside until the event concluded as I had asked her to. "So?" she asked. "Did it work?" "It worked," I said, and then I started crying. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me shaking with exhaustion and relief. Olivia hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you." I was terrified the whole time. What if she had found a way to discredit me? What if the collectors had taken her side? But they didn't, because you had the truth and the evidence to back it up. You were smarter than her, Natalie. Over the following days, the fallout from the event rippled through Portland's art community and beyond. The investigators' reports led to formal charges being filed against Veronica and Trevor. The Oregon Attorney General's office opened an investigation into Castellane Consulting, and several other states followed suit after victims came forward from Seattle, San Francisco, and even Los Angeles. The art publications I had contacted ran detailed stories about the scheme, using the documentation I provided to explain how predatory consultants operated and how gallery owners could protect themselves. My name appeared in several articles, sometimes as a source, sometimes as the protagonist of the story. The attention was uncomfortable at first, but it also brought new clients to Hawthorne Gallery. Jordan and Felix, the artists whose work Veronica had stolen and sold, were understandably shaken when I explained what had happened. But they were also impressed by how I had handled it. Jordan's piece, the one Veronica had sold without permission, was eventually recovered through legal channels and returned to me. I sold it properly, giving Jordan his full share of the proceeds plus compensation for the delay and trouble. "You could have just let it go," Jordan said when we met to discuss the resolution. "Cut your losses and moved on." "I couldn't," I said. "Not just for me, but for everyone else she would have hurt next." Felix was more direct in his appreciation. "You're a fighter, Natalie. That's rare in this business." The network Beth had suggested became a reality faster than any of us anticipated. Within a month, over 40 gallery owners from across the Pacific Northwest had joined an informal coalition dedicated to sharing information about suspicious buyers, consultants, and dealers. We created a secure online forum where we could flag potential problems and verify the legitimacy of business opportunities. The coalition attracted attention from larger institutions, including museum curators and established gallery owners who had witnessed similar schemes but had felt powerless to address them. Several law firms specializing in art fraud reached out, offering pro bono assistance to victims who wanted to pursue legal action against consultants like Veronica. As winter settled over Portland, I found myself busier than I had ever been. The publicity from exposing Veronica had brought unexpected benefits. Collectors who appreciated my integrity sought out Hawthorne Gallery specifically, wanting to work with someone they could trust. I hired an assistant to help manage the increased workload, a recent art history graduate named Iris, who brought fresh energy and ideas to the space. One afternoon in early January, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost did not answer, still wary of potential retaliation from Veronica's allies. But curiosity won out. "Is this Natalie?" "Yes." "My name is Catherine. I run the Belmont Gallery in San Diego. I heard about what you did in Portland." "Oh," I said, unsure where this was going. I had a similar experience 3 years ago with a different consultant. I didn't handle it the way you did. I just walked away from the industry entirely. But seeing your story made me realize I gave up too easily. I'm sorry that happened to you." "Don't be sorry. I'm calling because I want to reopen my gallery, and I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to advise me on how to protect myself this time around." That conversation was the first of many. Over the following months, I found myself in an unexpected role as a mentor and advocate for other gallery owners who had been burned by fraudulent operators. It was not a role I had sought, but it felt meaningful in a way that transcended simple business success. Veronica's legal troubles mounted steadily. The federal charges proceeded slowly, as these cases always did, but the civil lawsuits from her victims moved faster. Several collectors who had unknowingly purchased stolen artwork through her demanded refunds and threatened additional legal action. Castellane Consulting's business accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. I heard through the network that Veronica had tried to restart her consulting practice under a different name, but word spread quickly. No one would work with her. Her reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that she became essentially blacklisted from the art world. Trevor, meanwhile, attempted to distance himself from Veronica, claiming he had been unaware of the fraudulent aspects of their business. The evidence from his own emails made that defense difficult to maintain. He eventually reached a plea agreement with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Veronica in exchange for reduced charges. In March, I received an email from Diane, the gallery owner who had first warned me about Veronica months earlier. "I heard what you did. My friend Beth called me. Thank you for having the courage to do what needed to be done." Spring arrived in Portland with cherry blossoms and longer days. Hawthorne Gallery had survived its first year and was beginning to thrive. The artists I represented were gaining recognition, not through manipulation or fraud, but through genuine appreciation of their work. I had built something real and sustainable, something I could be proud of. Late one evening, after closing the gallery, I stood in the same doorway where I had stood a year earlier, watching light fade from the space. So much had changed. I had lost my naivety about the art world, but I had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that integrity was not a weakness, but a strength that could reshape an entire community. By summer, the legal consequences for Veronica had crystallized into something tangible and devastating. The federal wire fraud charges moved forward, with prosecutors building a case that spanned multiple states and dozens of victims. The cumulative evidence was overwhelming, not just from my documentation, but from the investigators' work and testimonies from gallery owners across the country who had come forward after reading about the case. Trevor's testimony proved damaging beyond what anyone had anticipated. In exchange for his cooperation, he provided detailed records of every fraudulent transaction Castellane Consulting had conducted over 3 years. The records showed a systematic operation, not isolated incidents of opportunism, but a deliberate business model built on exploitation. In June, I was asked to testify before a grand jury. The experience was surreal. Sitting in a formal courtroom and describing how Veronica had targeted me, gained my trust, and stolen from my artists. The prosecutors were thorough, walking through every email, every conversation, every piece of evidence I had gathered. "Why did you decide to confront her publicly, rather than simply report her to authorities?" one of the prosecutors asked. Because I had watched too many people lose everything to her and then stay silent out of fear or shame, I said. I wanted to break that pattern. I wanted other victims to know they weren't alone, and that it was possible to fight back. The grand jury returned indictments on multiple counts of wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, and conspiracy. Veronica's bail was set high enough that she struggled to pay it, her assets already depleted by frozen accounts and mounting legal fees. The woman who had once moved through Portland's art scene with such confidence was now facing decades in federal prison. The civil lawsuits progressed in parallel. Beth, Gregory, and 8 other gallery owners filed a class action suit seeking restitution for stolen artwork and lost income. The dollar amounts were staggering, collectively approaching $1 million, when accounting for the market value of pieces that had been sold without authorization. Veronica's lawyers attempted various defense strategies. They argued that the loan agreements signed by gallery owners constituted permission to sell the work. They claimed that any profits beyond agreed-upon commissions were simply shrewd business practices rather than fraud. They suggested that the gallery owners had been negligent in not following up more aggressively on their loaned pieces. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, and the pattern too established. Judge after judge rejected motions to dismiss, and settlement discussions went nowhere because Veronica refused to accept responsibility for her actions. She still thinks she can win, Beth told me after one particularly contentious court hearing. She still believes that money and lawyers can get her out of this. Let her believe it, I said. Reality will catch up eventually. In August, I received an unexpected visitor at the gallery. A woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, introduced herself as a journalist, working on a long-form piece about fraud in the art world. Your case against Veronica has attracted a lot of attention, she explained. But I'm interested in the broader pattern. How many other consultants are operating similar schemes? What are the systemic issues that allow this to happen? I spent 3 hours talking with her, sharing not just my own experience, but what I had learned from the network of gallery owners we had built. The conversation ranged across topics I had never fully articulated before: the power imbalances between consultants and emerging galleries, the lack of industry oversight, the cultural tendency to blame victims for being naive rather than perpetrators for being predatory. What do you want people to understand? The journalist asked at the end of our conversation. That this isn't about individual bad actors. It's about an industry that has allowed exploitation to flourish because it's more profitable for the powerful players to maintain the status quo than to implement real protections. The article was published in September, a 15-page investigation that used Veronica's case as the centerpiece, but expanded to examine dozens of similar schemes across the country. The response was immediate and intense. Art institutions that had previously ignored complaints about fraudulent consultants suddenly announced policy reviews. Industry associations promised new ethical guidelines. Law enforcement agencies in multiple states opened investigations into other suspected cases. I received hundreds of emails after the article appeared, some from other victims thanking me for speaking out, others from gallery owners asking for advice on how to protect themselves. A few were hostile, accusing me of damaging the industry's reputation or making it harder for legitimate consultants to operate. You've become a lightning rod, Olivia observed, scrolling through the messages on my laptop one evening. I know. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it. Too late now. You've changed the conversation. People are paying attention. She was right. The visibility was uncomfortable, but it was also effective. The network we had created evolved into a formal organization with bylaws, membership criteria, and dedicated resources for supporting fraud victims. We called it the Gallery Owners Alliance, and within 6 months of its founding, it had over 200 members across North America. October brought the first real cold snap of autumn and the beginning of Veronica's criminal trial. The courthouse was crowded with journalists, victims, and curious observers who had followed the case through media coverage. I sat in the gallery section, flanked by Beth and Gregory, watching as Veronica entered with her legal team. She looked different, diminished somehow. The confidence and polish that had once defined her presence had been replaced by something harder and more brittle. She avoided making eye contact with anyone in the courtroom, staring straight ahead as the proceedings began. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors methodically presented evidence, document after document, showing the scope and deliberation of Veronica's fraud. Trevor testified for 2 full days, describing how they had identified vulnerable gallery owners, approached them with promises of access to collectors, and then systematically stolen and resold their inventory. "Did you ever express concern about the legality of these actions?" the prosecutor asked Trevor during direct examination. "Several times," Trevor said. "Veronica always said we were operating within legal gray areas. She said the gallery owners were sophisticated business people who should have done more due diligence." "Did you believe that?" Trevor paused. "Eventually, I stopped asking questions. The money was good, and Veronica was very convincing. When it was my turn to testify, I walked through my entire experience, from the first day Veronica entered my gallery to the evening I confronted her. The defense attorney tried to suggest I had been negligent in loaning valuable artwork without more formal protections. "Isn't it true, Miss Natalie, that you signed a loan agreement with very broad terms?" "I did." "And isn't it true that you waited months before demanding your artwork back?" "Because I believed the person I was working with was operating in good faith. That's how trust works in business relationships. Veronica exploited that trust systematically." "But you could have been more careful, couldn't you?" "I could have been more paranoid," I said. "But the responsibility for fraud lies with the person committing it, not with their victims." Other gallery owners testified to similar experiences. The pattern was undeniable. Veronica had refined her approach over years, learning how to identify the most vulnerable targets and how to maintain plausible deniability while systematically stealing from them. The defense's case was weak. They argued that Veronica had genuinely believed she had permission to sell the artwork, that she had intended to share profits eventually, and that any failures to do so were business disputes rather than criminal acts. But the documented lies, the shell companies, and Trevor's testimony about deliberate fraud made those arguments ring hollow. During closing arguments, the lead prosecutor summarized the case with devastating clarity. This was not a misunderstanding or a business disagreement. This was a calculated, multi-year criminal enterprise designed to defraud small business owners who trusted the defendant's expertise and reputation. The defendant stole from people who could least afford it, people who were trying to build careers in a difficult industry. She showed no remorse, no willingness to make things right, and no recognition that her actions were wrong. The evidence demands accountability. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on all counts. Veronica showed no emotion as the foreman read each count aloud. Guilty of wire fraud, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of interstate commerce violations. Sentencing was scheduled for December. In the meantime, Veronica remained free on bail, though her movements were restricted and her passport had been surrendered months earlier. As autumn deepened, I tried to return my focus to running the gallery, but the trial had taken up enormous emotional energy, and I found myself exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. I had gotten what I wanted, justice for myself and for Veronica's other victims, but the process had been grinding and difficult. "You did the right thing," Olivia reminded me one evening when I expressed doubts. "All of those people who came forward, who testified, who joined the alliance, they're safer because of what you did." "I know. It just feels strange. I wanted to be a gallery owner, not an activist." "Maybe you get to be both now." In December, I returned to the courthouse for Veronica's sentencing hearing. The room was packed again, with many of the same faces from the trial. The judge allowed several victims to make impact statements before determining the sentence. Beth went first, describing how Veronica's fraud had forced her to close her gallery and leave the art world entirely. "I lost not just money, but my dream, my career, my sense of trust in other people." Gregory spoke about the financial devastation and the years it took to rebuild his business. Others described similar impacts: lives disrupted, careers derailed, confidence shattered. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood and approached the podium. "Your Honor, what Veronica did to me was wrong, and it hurt. But what makes it worse is knowing how many others she hurt before me, and how many more she would have hurt if she hadn't been stopped. I hope this sentence sends a message that exploiting people's trust and ambition is not acceptable, and that there are real consequences for that kind of predatory behavior." The judge listened to all the statements with careful attention, occasionally making notes. When the victims had finished, he addressed Veronica directly. "Miss Veronica, you operated a systematic fraud that targeted vulnerable business owners trying to establish themselves in a competitive industry. You exploited their trust, their passion for art, and their desire to succeed. The evidence shows this was not an isolated mistake or a business decision that went wrong. This was deliberate, calculated criminal conduct carried out over years." He paused, looking down at the documents before him. "The sentencing guidelines for your crimes allow for significant prison time. Given the scope of your fraud, the number of victims, and your complete lack of remorse throughout these proceedings, I am sentencing you to 12 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also be ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $943,000, to be distributed among your victims, according to a schedule determined by the court." The courtroom stirred with murmurs. 12 years was a substantial sentence, longer than many had expected. Veronica's face went white, and she gripped the edge of the defense table. Her lawyers immediately began discussing appeals, but the judge's tone made clear this decision was final. Trevor, who had already been sentenced as part of his plea agreement, received 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay his share of restitution. His cooperation had earned him leniency, but the judge made clear that he bore responsibility for his role in the fraud. As the hearing concluded and Veronica was led away by marshals, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that it was over, satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a strange emptiness, the sense that no sentence could fully repair the damage she had caused. Beth hugged me tightly in the courthouse hallway. "It's done. It's really done." "It is," I said, and realized I was crying. Over the following months, the restitution process began. Veronica's remaining assets were liquidated, her business dissolved, and payments started flowing to her victims. I received a check for $38,000, covering the value of the stolen artwork plus interest. It was not everything I had lost when accounting for the time and emotional toll, but it was something tangible. I used part of the money to commission new work from Jordan and Felix, ensuring they were compensated for the disruption Veronica had caused their careers. The rest I invested back into the gallery, expanding the space and hiring a second employee to help manage our growing roster of artists. The Gallery Owners Alliance continued to grow, becoming a legitimate force within the art industry. We successfully lobbied for new regulations requiring greater transparency in art consulting relationships. Several states passed laws making it easier for victims of art fraud to pursue criminal charges and civil remedies. In February, I was invited to speak at an art industry conference in Chicago. The topic was protecting emerging galleries from exploitation. Standing on the stage, looking out at hundreds of gallery owners, curators, and consultants, I felt the weight of how much had changed in just 18 months. When I opened my gallery, I thought success meant selling artwork and building relationships with collectors, I told the audience. I learned that real success means creating an industry where trust is protected, where exploitation is punished, and where emerging voices are supported rather than preyed upon. We all have a role to play in making that happen. The speech was well received, and afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories or questions about how to implement better protections. The conversation I had started in my gallery that December evening had expanded far beyond anything I had imagined. Spring came again to Portland, bringing with it renewal and growth. Hawthorne Gallery celebrated its second anniversary with an exhibition featuring 15 artists, some familiar and some new. The opening was packed with collectors, fellow gallery owners, and supporters who had followed my journey. Jordan's new piece, a stunning abstract that seemed to capture light itself, sold within the first hour. Felix's sculptures drew admiring crowds. I moved through the space, making introductions and facilitating conversations, feeling genuine joy in the work. Later, after most guests had left, I stood once more in the doorway of my gallery, looking out at the city lights. Olivia joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "You did it," she said. "You built something real." "We did it," I corrected. None of this would have been possible without everyone who stood up and refused to stay silent. In the month that followed, I received occasional updates about Veronica. She was serving her sentence at a federal facility in California, working in the prison library. Trevor was at a different facility, maintaining his cooperation agreement. Neither had shown any signs of remorse or acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. But Veronica's downfall had been complete and public. Her reputation in the art world was permanently destroyed. Her financial assets had been seized and distributed to her victims. Her freedom had been taken for over a decade. Most importantly, her ability to harm anyone else had been eliminated. Other consultants who had operated in similar gray areas quietly changed their business practices, aware that the scrutiny on the industry had intensified significantly. Several were investigated and prosecuted following the precedent set by Veronica's case, facing their own consequences for exploiting vulnerable gallery owners. Trevor, despite his cooperation, found that his involvement in the fraud had permanently marked him. Upon his release after serving 3 years, he discovered that no legitimate business in the art world would hire him. His attempts to rebrand himself failed repeatedly as former colleagues and victims ensured that anyone who searched his name found detailed accounts of his crimes. He eventually left the art industry entirely, taking a low-level administrative job far from the world he had once navigated with such calculated cruelty. As for me, I had learned that revenge was not simply about making someone pay for their wrongdoing. It was about creating accountability, protecting others, and ensuring that justice was not just served, but visible. Some might call what I did risky or vindictive, but I knew it was necessary, and I would do it again without hesitation.